it feels like we are back. So welcome to our summer series. My name is Scott Simpson. I'm the Acquisition COI Government Chair, and I'm really happy that y'all are with us today. We're joined by a lot of different folks, and I want to recognize the other members here of our COI panel. We've got Mike Scorney, who is the Acquisition Gov Chair with me, Kisa Sateri from SAIC, who's the Industry Chair, and Ben Margolin, our great Industry Vice Chair from Aqua. The Acquisition COI focuses on all things acquisition, and so we touch on a lot of different areas. You'll see us talk about emerging tech. You'll see us talk about procurement. You'll see us talk about, maybe the revolutionary FAR overhaul. We talk about it all. And so no matter what your interest is, I hope you'll join us and become a member and submit your ideas and get involved. We've got a lot of great events coming up over the summer. This is just the first of many. July 16th, we're talking with Stan Soloway, who's formerly President and CEO of the Professional Services Council, and also the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Reform. In August, we're talking with Alan Thomas, the former Commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service here at GSA. And then in September, with the date TBD, we're talking with Sunny Hashmi, the former Commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service. So we'll get dueling former commissioners there. So make sure to join us in August and September to collect them all. This is a joint event with the federal, the FIE. And to explain what the FIE is, I'm going to turn it over to my great colleague, Kisa Sateri. But Kisa,
there we go.
There we go.
Yep. No, I was on mute. Sorry about that. Alrighty, so the Federal Insight Exchange serves as a platform that brings industry and government executives together to focus on focused discussions. These are short duration programs enable agency leaders to share priorities, challenges, and success stories on topics critical to their agencies. We have 15 different teams in the FIE series. We're constantly looking for new volunteers and across all the FIE teams. So if you in any way you're interested in participating as a volunteer, I'm part of the GSA FIE team and have been for years and love that team. Please reach out to April Davis. You can reach out to her via email at adavis@actiac.org. So with that, I think stays with me, and I will start off our session today. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Without further ado, we're ecstatic with the speakers that we have joining us today. So I want to do a quick introduction, and we're running this more like a fireside chat. So we're going to pepper our speakers with a number of questions. Please don't hesitate to ask your questions via the Q&A feature here or the chat feature, and we'll go through your questions as well. So we have a bunch of questions from Ben, myself, and Mike that we're going to ask, and then we're also going to look to you for any questions you may have, and we'll make sure to have at least save a 15 minutes or so through the end of the program to run through your questions. So with that, let me quickly introduce our speakers. Today we have joining us are Emily Murphy, CEO of Government Procurement Strategies and the former GSA administrator. She brings a wealth of knowledge around government contracting and procurement, federal acquisition regulations, pricing, GSA schedules, IDIQ contracts, and then also Rebecca Pselos, who is a senior advisor with Smart Policy Group and also brings a wealth of knowledge and background in federal procurement through her roles at GSA, NASA, and GAO. So with that, I'll start off with this first set of questions that we have, if that's okay. Emily and Rebecca, are you ready?
Ready.
All right, awesome.
Thanks for having us.
So first one, we're kind of look at the FAR overhaul. Emily, during your time as GSA administrator, what were some of the significant challenges you identified in the existing FAR framework?
I think probably the top challenge that we saw in the FAR framework was that it focused on process over results sometimes, that it was very, it was very step-by-step aligned rather than, and even down to what was considered a best-in-class contract was much more about the process than the result that the government got. So I found that frustrating with it, but it was also, I think, the result of the fact that a lot of things in the FAR exist because someone did something they weren't supposed to do. And instead of the fact we caught the person doing something they weren't supposed to do and they were punished for doing what they weren't supposed to do, everyone feels the need to then regulate or pass another law saying, really, we mean it this time, don't do it. So we end up with a lot of the FAR being sort of a, no, this time, really, really don't do it, rather than actually letting a contractor be a business advisor. I mean, two of the things we tried to do, and I'm hoping that this administration is going to be successful in doing, is get consumption-based pricing on cloud. That was one of the priorities that we tried every year to get. And then also 876, which I always have to be careful. Everyone hears me say A76 when I say, I mean 876, which was the ability to do IDIQ contracts that were awarded only based on technical merit, and the pricing was going to be developed at the time of task order, because it frustrated me that we spent so much of our time evaluating pricing that didn't actually mean anything, because we never ever used that particular labor category or that CLIN or anything else. So we had all of this data that we were requiring industry to develop and deliver, and then GSA had to evaluate to no end, rather than actually getting in the best companies we could and then letting them fight like cats and dogs at the time of the task order to get the absolute best pricing. So those are the two that I wish that I hope we'll get back.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you for those honest answers. Rebecca, could you elaborate on the key changes being proposed in the FAR overhaul and how these changes are expected to streamline the federal acquisition process?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm going to tag off of what Emily was talking about is, the FAR was written because something had happened that shouldn't have happened. First half of my career as a federal employee, I was at the Government Accountability Office doing a lot of oversight. And so we were quick to catch all those 1102s, right? And we didn't really give a lot of deference to them if the program was pushing for something else. They just were kind of stuck in a tight spot. So I think with the FAR overhaul, as you're looking at the sections that they're rolling out, they're really starting to empower the 1102s. You see that with how they're streamlining it back to the basics, and then the practitioner albums, the tools that they're slowly rolling out with everything, and more guides are coming. And so I think that's really what you're going to see is they're going to try to empower the 1102s so we get what the government needs to be buying. I think also in line with the executive order, there's a lot of consolidation. I'd love to see where we are a year, 2 years from now when we start talking about spend under management and what this consolidation means. Again, going back to my oversight years, and even going and speaking up to Congress, that idea of, what are you buying? Why are you buying it? What type of information do you have on it? So I think those are two things that are really going to come out of this rewrite.
Thank you for that. So we keep hearing a lot about commercial solutions. Yeah, I think you may have been under a rock if you haven't heard of it in the past few months. Emily, how do commercial solutions fit into the broader strategy for modernizing federal procurement, and what role do they play in fostering innovation within government agencies?
So the idea of going to commercial solutions isn't a new one. It was actually one Steve Kellman was pushing when he was the OFPP administrator in the Clinton administration. So it's sort of interesting to see how everything old is new again, and we just keep, we're revisiting it. But the idea is that government developed systems, if they're not well scoped, if they're not well managed, can end up not taking too long or becoming too cumbersome. The government gets locked in. I think a good example might be, I'll go back to GSA Advantage. It was originally built by the government. It was the best e-commerce site of the mid-90s. It is still the best e-commerce site of the mid-90s. They're doing everything they can to try and make it better. But it is a long, arduous process to do that. So the idea is if the commercial sector has already developed something and they can do it well, why shouldn't we use that or adapt that as to the minimal amount possible, so that we don't have to spend the government's limited resources going out and redeveloping it. We also have better information on what is a reasonable price, because other people are already buying this. So there's a lot of good in this idea. The challenge becomes when we try and pair that with things like the Part 10 rewrite, where we say we're going to look first and foremost at government-wide contracts. A lot of innovative new companies who've got those commercial solutions, the first thing that occurs to them when they've got a really cool new product isn't, let me go get on a GUAC. Or they're in, when is there going to be the right open window? So there's going to be some tension in there, but I think that the overall move towards commercial solutions has been and remains a very strong one, and that the government's been pushing for over 30 years now.
Thank you for that, Emily. Rebecca, can you share some successful examples or case studies that you know of where the implementation of commercial solutions significantly improved procurement outcomes in federal agencies?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about outcomes and you're comparing it to commercial versus something that's built for government, you're looking really at two things, maybe three. The first one being speed, right? You're not spending all that time developing. You're not waiting to see if it's going to be successful or not. The second one is, the cost, because you're not putting in all that. And then the third is you're getting something that you can work with, right? And so I think some of those examples out there are almost common sense, where you've seen commercial has come in and delivered a little bit better. I think back to, when I was at GAO again, and we were looking at the defense travel system 10 years in, and they were still working on developing it, right? I think you look at some of the learning management systems, there's a lot out there those are practices used in industry too, that you can turn around and say, okay, well, is this very close to what we're getting? And so if you think about something that can take a decade plus, or it doesn't really get what you want at good value, I think you can see why commercial can be really attractive. You can get it fast, you can get it much more reasonable, and you can decide if that works for you. And usually it will, 80% of the time that will work for you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm going to turn it over to Scott for our next topic around OneGov strategy.
Thanks very much. So I just wanted to get your thoughts around the consolidation that's happening right now. We've heard a lot about the bringing common buy from other agencies into one consolidated place of GSA. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that consolidation, the one buy, one spend. And Emily, we'll start with you.
Right. So I think that we're seeing a few really interesting things happen right now. Some agencies have moved a lot of their contracting over to GSA already. So if you look at SBA, OPM, others, where GSA is now handling a lot of that. GSA has gone out with internal emails that I think that Jason Miller has gotten a copy of, and so that's what I've read them, and you probably have also, talking about setting up a centralized contracting shop within the Federal Acquisition Service to help, in addition to the work that's already happening in the Assisted Acquisition Group. So trying to figure out what that service delivery model is going to look like. But we're also under a freeze from the courts on reorganizations. So no one's been able to actually give the full plan for what this is going to look like. So I think we all still have a lot of questions out there. I think OneGov, the idea behind it is that you have a single enterprise level contract. It seems to be that it would go directly with the OEM to the extent possible, rather than through value-added resellers. And you'd get much better control over that spend under management, because you'd know exactly who was buying how many copies of a license or how many instances of thing. And so you'd be able to negotiate the pricing based on the actual desire. You wouldn't end up with unused licenses out there. The government would have better control over that spending and make sure that they're not leaving money on the table. In the past, there have always been challenges, though, when you have requirements-based contracts that, and back when GSA was a mandatory source, they ended up having to pay out when people found ways around those requirements contracts. So there needs to be some caution and some sort of safety nets built into this process as well. And it's going to be interesting to see how GSA really launches that. I think that we're going to see there's a plan in front of Congress right now to allow the agencies, I think, $100 million for reorganization, and then to lift the stays that the injunctions have, the courts have on the reorganization, see if that moves forward and gives GSA the ability to sort of really implement come first quarter of next fiscal year.
Yeah, really great insights. I hadn't heard about the legislation in front of Congress yet. When you were talking about, tracking licenses and making sure that there's enough and everything else, that makes me think about what kind of like headache or nightmare that will be to track all of the licenses that we buy for, say, like an Adobe or something like that. Rebecca, can you talk about some of the other major hurdles that you see in implementing this OneGov strategy?
Yeah, I think this is really changing the model that we have of working with resellers, right? There's this desire to go direct to OEMs, and that's very different. I think everyone is trying to figure out what their role is, how can they accommodate and meet the government. It's not that they don't want to, it's just a different way of looking at it. So a few things there, I think, really getting legal teams looking at what you're doing, those terms and conditions, that's going to change a little bit with this model if you had been using a reseller. At the same time, you look at what GSA wants to do, and it's going to existing contracts, those government-wide contracts. So there's a question of how can you be directly accessible to the government if you aren't going to necessarily have a reseller there to help you out. And so that's a big change too that you have to figure out. On top of, we've got this reduced workforce that we're dealing with too. And so everything is kind of coming together at the same time, all these barriers. And I think it's making what could be small barriers on their own seem a lot larger. And so really just kind of going piecemeal by piecemeal and understanding what direction you're going is going to be very important so you don't get overwhelmed. I think there is a lot of silver lining there with all these opportunities. Again, with that FAR rewrite, trying to simplify things. I think there are a chance to kind of revisit some of these terms and conditions and to see, how can we work with industry, those OEMs, to make this work? How can we make it a more attractive marketplace? And if we do that, there's a good chance that we can also grow our industrial base if we're thinking more of, a new model. How do we get more people to the table to directly work with the government? So I think there's a lot of good things too, and it shouldn't just be seen as barriers. It's just going to be a different way of doing business.
I really love your comment there about how each one of them by themselves is a little speed bump. When you put them all together, you have kind of this big mountain to overcome. And I think it's really great to recognize too that if you identify these challenges up front, right, it doesn't mean that the whole thing is going to break down. It's just as you identify the challenges, you have to identify the risk and a mitigation strategy, and you work your way through it, kind of one step at a time. And then, as you mentioned, the reduced federal workforce, I think it brings us really nicely right into the next topic of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. Emily, maybe you want to start off this time about, what role do you think that technology is going to play in federal procurements, and how can agencies leverage that technology to enhance efficiencies?
Short answer is it's going to play a big role, and agencies should be very careful. But in a little bit more nuance and depth there, I don't think there's any question that we're going to have to use technology to augment and support the workforce that remains in the government. There's just so much that has to get done, and if we don't make things easier for that workforce, if we don't give them tools, the work's not going to get done, and the mission will suffer. So making sure that now the question becomes, how do you make sure you've got the right technologies? And there's some really cool technologies out there. I know that even when I was at GSA, we were looking at how do you do responsibility determinations using our robotics process automation overnight, which seems very antiquated now that we're talking about AI. But at the time, RPA seemed like we were, launching pretty far ahead. The Made in America bot that they created to look at the schedule. So I mean, GSA's got a long history of using technology very creatively to speed up the acquisition process, get things done faster. The question's going to be, how do we train AI correctly so that it can actually be very supportive of the workforce in such a way that we have confidence and that it shows its work? The last thing you need is, I know there've been court cases where Attorneys have relied on ChatGPT or some AI bot and ended up with fake citations in their briefs, and they end up in a lot of trouble. I would not want to be the one having to defend a bid protest against something that AI did if you didn't have the track record to explain how that determination was made or how that supported the contracting officer in making what is an inherently governmental determination. So making sure that AI shows its work and that it really tracks the process of how we want the workforce to be working. I know when we did a lot of the RPA and modernization work before, we tried to each time look at the process first, fix the process, and then automate, rather than automating a broken process. And so the fact that this is all happening concurrently with a FAR rewrite and practitioners' albums and things like that coming out gives you an opportunity to think about how do you want to do things, and then how can you build the technology or implement the technology to support that, rather than just trying to speed up an existing process.
I think those are all really great points. And when you think about artificial intelligence and how it can augment any workforce, not just the federal workforce, I think the ones that you look at first are those ones that, kind of like you mentioned, inherently governmental functions, stuff that you don't really need to use a lot of brain power on, that is sort of routine. And that way you shift the time management for that person to things that are, high value, high cognition that only a person can do. Those, what you would call inherently personal functions, maybe.
Right. So that we're letting, we always talked about it as being high value work, that you want the federal workforce to be doing the highest value work possible and taking the low value work, taking data entry off their plates, taking, the busy work off their plates, but making sure that you've done it in a smart way that gives them the information that they need and gives them the insight into the decision, greater insight into the decisions they're going to be making, not restricts their insight so that to force them into one decision.
Yep, exactly. Rebecca, do you have any specific technologies or tools that you've seen that might help in this area?
I think robotic processing has really been where we've done a lot. I think people are very cautious about AI. I think with the chances of protests and things like that, it's right to be cautious, right? You don't want to invest a lot of time in what you're doing just to be told, stop, you're gonna have to go back to the drawing board. I think large language modeling is going to have a really interesting place going forward, especially with market research, to be able to sift through so much information that we have out there, and even maybe completing a life cycle, looking at some of the CPARs and figuring out how you can pull that in. I think there's some tools there where as a human, we just run out of time and we can't process all those acquisition files, and we can't figure out how to do all that in a timely manner. And I think that's where technology could probably really shine for us. I think there's a lot of other things that you can do out there, but you're going to have to really address how the systems all talk to each other. I think right now, if you have independent, separate systems, a lot of times you need that human element to make the systems work together. I remember we were so short on licenses at one of the agencies I was at, like to get something into a PDF and then to send on, there was always kind of workarounds, right? And so I think you have to, that's just a very simple thing. So I think you have to start thinking about how these systems work together to really get that value out of AI.
Have you seen any good workarounds or good examples or use cases of someone that's doing this right, or an example of where that's done right with the interoperability yet?
I think people have come up with some very innovative ways for their particular circumstances. I think the trick will be to make it repeatable, and maybe bringing more functions under GSA with that OneGov strategy. Maybe that's where we kind of get that critical mass to say, let's actually invest in this and spend the time to do it. Because this has always kind of been a pet project. Someone's saying, oh, I can do this easier. Here's my free time. But we haven't had a lot of funds to do these big uplifts and really embrace the technology like we need to. And so I think that's really where we haven't quite seen what we truly can do with this technology.
Yeah, when I was the product owner for a couple of AI tools, that was always the biggest thing, is how do you show the return on investment from a government perspective? And to me, it was always, decreased time for that human, or increased value for that human. And so if you could show that, hey, by using AI, I could do it better, or I can do it faster. Those are the two big return on investments. Have you seen anything else, Rebecca, or Emily? I saw you nodding too, so feel
I
free to
would,
jump in after.
yeah, I would just add, when you're talking about some of like the major weapon systems and the larger things, like even at NASA, if you're looking at the research and development and the testing and evaluation, I think that's really where AI has shined, where you can do some digital twinning and see what would work, what doesn't work. Again, you have to have the right parameters and know your physics, but I think that there's a lot of time you can save, a lot of testing where you save money, and we can really kind of jumpstart the innovation. And so I think that's really where most of the successful AI has been that I've seen. And I think that will slowly trickle its way to other processes.
Thanks, Emily.
I've seen some really cool demos recently on the use of AI in requirements development, market research, just that initial sort of slog through data. And frankly, also in pricing and analytics around pricing. So I think that those are going to be areas that they can be leveraged if they're done properly. And again, it's making sure you've got the right data that's being placed in there, and you don't want to teach your AI to do things the wrong way, because then unteaching it is really hard.
Oh,
So taking it a little bit more deliberately and intentionally as you're building those out, and making sure that that it's being done correctly. I think if it's done correctly, it'll be an incredible tool for 1102s, for from program managers, for others to be able to leverage. It's never going to replace them, but it hopefully will help speed things up.
I hope not. I'm an 1102. I'm sure there's lots of other people out there too.
No, my point being that we are going to need, like, our acquisition workforce is going to become increasingly important with these tools, because unless they're empowered and to use the tools appropriately, we don't need a Terminator situation out there where the AI takes over and makes.
And that's what we go back to.
Yeah,
we want to avoid that, and that's where we go back with AI as a tool. AI is augmenting. AI is helping us do it better or faster. Let's jump into how to kind of oversee that a little bit. Emily, we'll start with you. How do you foresee the federal procurement process evolving, and what are some critical areas that you think need to have that continuous improvement going?
So I think that this is where it becomes challenging. We've got such an incredibly aggressive agenda for federal procurement reform right now. I've never seen it. I've been in this space for 30 years. And I thought that the procurement reforms of the 90s were really impressive. This is even more ambitious. You've got the Forged Act, pending in Congress, that I think we're expecting to see incorporated into the NDAA this year. You've got the Revolutionary Fire overhaul taking place. You've got consolidation. You've got Secretary of Defense memos coming out on how to buy professional services and how to buy licensing, which is almost unheard of for the Secretary of Defense to be putting out procurement memos. So you've got more attention being paid to government contracting than I can think of in recent history. So you've got sort of a perfect storm of people all trying to push towards modernization, trying to push towards reform. But you've also got the reality being that in 2 years from now, who knows what's going to happen with Congress? We are having trouble getting appropriations done in a timely manner. We're on a full year CR. That makes it a lot harder to put things through. You've got stays around reorganizations that makes it harder to get things done. So this entire process of let's speed things up, we want to get things done, and that there seems to be an agreement between Congress and the executive branch that things need to be done faster, and that we can't keep waiting this long. I know that there was a GAO report last week that talked about how for most major weapon systems, it takes at least 13 years to get to initial capability, and that the warfighter can't wait that long for that to happen. So everyone wants things to get faster. Not everyone agrees on how that we should get there, though. And as leadership in Congress evolves, changes, different tensions come in, the question becomes and is there going to be pushback politically on things happening? And is there going to be that tolerance for mistakes and errors? Because if you try something new, something's going to break. And if it breaks and it breaks small and you fix it, then you've got a real improvement. But if it breaks small and everyone looks at that and seizes it and says, this entire thing was a failure, we're not willing to tolerate this. We need to have more controls. We need to be reviewing even more things. We need to have more touches on the system. Then we're just going to slow things down even more than we've already slowed them down. So there's going to be an innate tension over the next few years. We always tend to see that pendulum go back and forth between we're ready to lean into reform to we need to crack down and follow the rules and be really strict and we need more oversight. And when the pendulum swings this hard towards reform, my fear is always it's going to swing even harder back over to that oversight side, unless things are done perfectly, and perfect doesn't happen in this world.
Yeah, I love that reference to start small, fail small, learn, move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that my colleague Ben has a lot of experience over there. So Ben, why don't you jump in?
So thanks, Scott. I was going to pivot a little bit, a couple other topics. One is around stakeholder collaboration. Things have been, from the industry side, things have been pretty quiet over the last 5 months, I'd say. And sort of just want to, how important is the stakeholder collaboration and the success of these different initiatives? And how can the private sector engage effectively with the government given the environment that we're in today?
I'll jump in here. Stakeholder coordination is always important. And even if it feels like it's a one-way street right now, as it probably does with most administration changes, it's still important. It doesn't mean that it's not important. If you go to some of those practitioner albums that are coming out with a FAR rewrite, and I see Emily's head nodding because she was going to say this and I beat her to the punch, but they talk about industry days. They are highlighting some of the stuff that the pill has done out of DHS. They're highlighting reverse industry days and saying, don't be shy to do this. You don't necessarily have to talk to every single vendor, but you need to get out there and see what industry is doing and have these conversations. And so I'm really hopeful that we'll start seeing this come back. I know GSA has always really worked with the industry. They see industry as a partner. I think when you see the successes out there, there has been a lot of coordination and it's from everybody. And I think you'll also see more coordination internally with the stakeholders within the agencies. It's not just the program or the 1102s. There's kind of a return to getting the CIO's office in and make sure it's secure. So I think there's a lot of stakeholders, and what we're seeing is they've kind of taken it apart right now to figure out how to put it back together. And that's where we're going to go. And that stakeholder coordination is going to be really important, from the financial folks to the security, from the CIO's office, CISO's office, to the 1102s, the programs. And then when you're talking about industry, same with that. You've got so many stakeholders on the industry side too, to make sure what you're selling is meeting those security requirements, is meeting the need, that it's being done in a cost-effective manner.
And I'll say that I think that's actually one of the important reasons for ACT-IAC to keep it to exist, is that ACT-IAC does an incredible job of bringing together both industry stakeholders and government stakeholders. And I hope you'll continue to do that. It's an incredibly important mission. I want to give some credit. When I was first confirmed as administrator, I didn't meet with any outside groups until I'd met with each of the regions. And it took about 100 days or so to do that, because I wanted to talk to people internally first. But I do think that you can only focus internally so long. You do need to be engaging externally as well. And I think we're starting to see Larry Allen and others come out and start talking more publicly, engaging. Now, some of them are waiting for confirmation. It makes it, when you're waiting for confirmation, you're not supposed to go out and talk publicly. So understandable that they'd be reluctant to do so at that point. But I'm encouraged that we're seeing more engagement. I'm encouraged that when you go to each one of the new sections on the Revolutionary FAR overhaul, there is a comment box in the top right-hand corner saying, please give us feedback on this. And you don't have to go through regulations.gov to do it. You can actually just submit it in there. So I would encourage people to be doing that and to be sharing that information. Give feedback. The dialogue only works if people actually are willing to to give that feedback and that insight into what might have been missed, what could be done better. So I'd say lean in hard if you're in industry right now, and if you're in 1102, lean in harder, because it's going to be what your life is going to look like in the future.
Yeah, and Scott just on that point, Scott just put a link in the chat if
Oh,
folks
good.
give feedback on what's going on with the FAR changes. That's an example of what can be done and will help folks know where to go to do exactly that. Switching gears a little bit and thinking about small business, I know we have representatives from lots of different businesses on the line today. How do you think about these initiatives supporting small businesses and startups maybe that are looking to enter the marketplace that maybe haven't engaged in federal government contracting before? You know, what do you see as some of the things that are going on now that can help either existing smalls or companies that may not have sold to the government before, but may be looking to do it based on some of the changes that are happening?
I think that if you removing barriers to entry, which is hopefully one of the things that this FAR overhaul is going to do, is to make it easier to take away requirements that aren't absolutely necessary for the government to succeed in its mission. Taking those away should make it easier for small businesses to contract with the government. It should expanding and really promoting commercial also should make it for innovative new companies to come through that door as long as they can find the doorway. So we've got to actually do some outreach and make sure that they are being recruited and told that we want them as part of the industrial base. So I think that there's a lot of positive there. And it actually takes me back to in about 2012 or 2013, the House Armed Services Committee issued a report on doing business with the Department of Defense and on how to try and get more small businesses into the industrial base. And at that point in time, they recommended a lot of things to reduce those barriers to entry. And in those 10 years, we've seen the number of small businesses participating fall because a lot of those recommendations weren't implemented. So hopefully this is a chance to get a lot of to make up that lost ground and get more small businesses back in the space.
Great. And Rebecca, what advice would you give to small businesses to navigate the procurement landscape and so that they can, you know, essentially compete effectively for government contracts? A lot of people throw up their hands because they're like, I just can't deal with everything that I have to deal with to sell to the government. So what advice would you give to small businesses out there?
There's a lot to learn. There's definitely a learning curve, but I think I would go back to the basics that you would be asking yourself every year, no matter what's going on. You know, what are you selling to the government? Do they need it? You might think it's an awesome solution you have, but does the government need it? Is that going to meet their needs? And is it going to give them the value that they need? They have folks coming in all the time that says, hey, I've got this cool AI solution, right? Since we were talking about AI. But unless you really understand how they're going to use it, that is probably your number one obstacle. So kind of going back to the basics, make sure you understand what you're selling and what the value is. I think some of the other things to think about is, you know, there's definitely a preference for commercial. This is a good time to kind of go in with that type of attitude of, okay, let me get on schedules, let me get essentially my fishing license, and then go see what I can sell on, because now I'll be accessible. And so that's one of the places I would start. So you get that contract and accessibility. I'd also be looking at some of the more non-traditional things. We've seen a lot more use of OTAs, that other transaction authority. We've seen commercial solutions openings. There's a lot of emphasis out there to try to expand that innovation in the defense and industrial base, like Emily's talking about. And so they are trying to figure out ways to reach out. Even with the new Part 39 that just got released a couple days ago, they're looking at doing modular, and they're doing it in a way that doesn't cause vendor lock-in, right? They want to encourage down select. They want to go out and essentially have bake-offs if you're kind of looking at the best practices they're doing there. So making sure you know what you're selling to the government is number one, so then you can take advantage of all these other ways of getting in front of the government.
And if you're doing the R&D, don't forget SBIR. The SBIR program, I'm a huge fan of the SBIR program, and I'm really proud of what GSA has done with phase 3 SBIRs over the years. So hopefully that's going to continue to be an emphasis also, because that brings in some really creative commercial technologies, lets them be adapted and then implemented in the government space.
All right, and I'll pass it over to Mike for a few more questions.
So I want to continue kind of with the theme of lowering barriers to entry through some of the regulatory and legislative changes that have kind of been coming out there. And I wanted to get both of your thoughts on what are the biggest challenges that companies face with the current regulatory environment, and what would you like to see addressed both in things like the Forge Act and future reforms coming out? And then some insights on, with the pace of everything happening, how can companies stay up to date with all the regulatory changes and the statutory changes that are happening to be able to ensure that they're competitive within the marketplace and that they're being able to be heard with what solutions they're bringing to bear for the big challenges that we have in government.
So I think when you look at commercial companies, the challenge is often that there are so many terms and conditions that are currently being applied to contracts that don't necessarily need to be in there. It's going to be really interesting to see when the new Part 12 is released, exactly what is included, if there's any relief from that. If you go back and look at the 809 panel and the SARA panel, each of them recommended removing or limiting the use of a lot of those clauses so that we try and take government contracting back to really mission requirements, less than trying to solve the world's ills through government contracting. And contracting can do lots of things, and it can solve a lot of the world's ills, but it's hard to do that and also get something in a timely manner at a reasonable price. So we ask a lot of the system. I'd say that we're seeing, though, a lot of focus on price and cost transparency, which is also can be both helpful and harmful to new companies or companies in the marketplace, making sure that they understand the difference between those. I was encouraged to see that GSAs continuing to implement the TDR, the transactional data rule, and so moving away from the price reduction clause, which will definitely alleviate a burden on a lot of contractors, and hopefully also means that GSA will have more time to actually be focused on getting the best value out of their contracts. And that they've asked Congress to actually give them authority to make schedules determinations based on best value at the time of award, not just lowest price. So that would be a great burden to remove. Say, anything that's the fact that the stated goal is to remove any burden that's not required by statute is a good start. Now, that said, government contracting can be pretty scary if you're a company that does not have the compliance systems in place. If you're being told you have to have a new accounting system, if you're being told you have to have a new HR system, if you have to have an auditable subcontracting system, all of those systems cost money and they create problems. And then the False Claims Act exists for a very good reason, but is terrifying if you're a business just entering that marketplace. So I don't mean to suggest that we can get rid of everything, because you can't. The government needs to have assurances in there as well. But it'll be interesting to see how they try to balance the tension between trying to open the aperture as far as possible to bring in really innovative commercial companies and continue to work with the companies they've got. When we talk about innovation, we shouldn't ignore the companies who've been delivering for us all of these years and operate the way they do, not because they're trying to be obstreperous or problematic to the government, but because they built themselves exactly the way the government told them to. So there's always this, let's get in these new commercial companies. They're great. Don't forget that the companies you've got have also delivered a lot, and you better figure out a way to you want to keep bringing them along as well. You don't want to lose that institutional knowledge. Sorry, that was a random aside there.
Rebecca, do you have some thoughts to add around like how companies can kind of keep pace with all of the change that's happening out there, and where they should kind of be thinking to ensure that they're future-proofing themselves to ensure that they're meeting what the government is asking of them?
Definitely pay attention to the FAR override. So if you go to acquisition.gov, there's a section. Be following that. Dive into the tools that they're providing. Don't just look at the new text. They've got line in, line out that they're providing. They've got those practitioner albums. Go through those little short training modules that are there for the 1102s, but they're just as important for industry to know too. Provide comments. I think there's a lot of media inside the Beltway that's doing a good job staying on top of things. I think the current administration, they've been putting out a lot of press releases as they go forth, trying to explain the intention behind everything. So look at those, especially like the GSA blogs. I would also say this is a great opportunity to go back to your mission holders and to the contracting officers that you're working with and kind of build up and strengthen those relationships you have. Everyone's kind of in the same boat watching this come out really quickly. So with the FAR rewrite, agencies have 30 days to implement that. They're using an interim rule-making process. And so they're trying to figure this out too. And this is a great way to say, you want to be helpful, you want to be following along. What does this mean, right? Because when you do have a problem, when you need a troubleshoot, you've already built up that trusted relationship. And so you can have these conversations. Always, look out for RFIs, respond, ask questions, use those Q&A periods. But I think this is really a time to like refocus your relationships and make sure that they're there and doing what you need them to do.
I think that's a really great point, because more often than not, people try to go scouring the internet for looking for an answer when they can simply just ask the contracting officer and hear straight from the horse's mouth what's going on there. And I want to
maybe
point out that Scott added in the chat there a recommendation to make sure that you're constantly providing the feedback and input as the different parts of the FAR are released, to be able to know that this is evolving in an iterative process, and whatever's coming out right away is not exactly what the final version of that's going to be when all of this is accomplished here.
And have some patience too. The answer might not be known yet. So as much as you may have that relationship that you're asking questions, also talk with other industry folks too. They might have some insight, but have some patience as everyone figures this out too.
Because if you're in industry, you've got to remember that the contracting officer has probably lost some of their colleagues, had their workload increase. They've got different customers and their program managers, because some of those people took the fork in the road or did other things. So they're trying to navigate a world of changes in addition to the regulatory changes, just like you are. So everyone's trying to navigate this together.
Mm-hmm. And Emily and I, we work with a lot of folks together. And I think that's one of the things that is just easy to remember, is just go back to the common basics of, treating people as people. And we're all in this for the best result. You wouldn't be a federal contractor if you didn't want to provide something and make the government better. So everyone has the same intentions. It's just, we're in it together to figure out the best path forward.
So we talked a little bit earlier about emerging tech and AI involved in the procurement process and enabling the workforce a little bit. And then Emily, you just mentioned price across transparency and transactional data and gathering that information. What do you guys see for as the workforce starts to dig into the challenges of an evolving procurement landscape? What do you see, what data is most useful to drive decision making for acquisitions? And I'll start with you, Emily, on that one.
And I feel like I'm going to repeat myself on this, so I apologize, but I think it's the market research data and it's the pricing data. So understanding what the potential capabilities are in the market, how you, what kinds of companies you need to be reaching to capture those capabilities, and then making sure that you've got the right kind of information about cost and pricing, so that you know what can be bought and how it's going to be bought. I think that the new tools will also help us hopefully develop more performance-based work standards, and more. I know that there's a large focus on making sure that contracts going forward really deliver a savings or a value, so that that you can be a lot more transparent in that, also of what the intended outcome is going to be, and that the government then can assess, frankly, do a better job also with past performance. Because right now, some CPARs are amazing and they give you incredible information and insights, and some of them are phoned in. And so trying to make sure that we've got the right data.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, even in your personal life, looking at Yelp reviews and trying to figure out who's actually telling the truth about, performance of a company or a service or something like that, and who's kind of has just a one-off bad experience there.
Yes.
Rebecca, you kind of talked a little bit about CPARs earlier and better leveraging that. And so kind of building off of what Emily was talking about, do you have any thoughts around like what data could be more useful from that that system and how we could better leverage past performance information?
I think making CPARs more of a priority, not an afterthought, and being intentional about it is going to go a long way. Once you get good data in there consistently, that is useful. We have the technology to pull that information out if we choose to do so. So I think being really mindful. In the past, we've had data, going back to my oversight years. Data, what does it mean? It was almost too much to do anything with. And I think we're entering this new phase where we can do a lot with data. I do want to highlight one of the things to be watching when it comes to data is the transactional data reporting on GSA schedules. So when it first got rolled out as a pilot, there's a lot of criticism about it. They're like, oh, well, you kind of collected it, but you didn't do anything with the data. A few years in, they started doing more with the data, kind of learned how to refine that data. Earlier this month, GSA came out and said that they will be doing TDR across schedules and phasing it in. And so I think when you start looking at what we can do when we're very intentional about the data and we have a plan for using that data, I think you'll see it actually deliver more value on that.
And I want to wrap up with last question around workforce and what all of this kind of means for the workforce and the evolution of the 1102s that are out there. And thank you, Emily, for talking a little bit about some of the understanding for how industry is engaging with the 1102s who have chosen to remain in government service here. I think that that's really important for everybody to remember. But so all of the things above considered, how do you see everything sort of enabling the evolving procurement workforce to make better buying decisions for the federal government?
So if we take the FAR overhaul at face value, part one really suggests that this is about empowering that federal workforce, and that the new principles that are have been put out there, it's about driving decisions down to the lowest levels. So what an exciting time to be in federal procurement. And you're getting new tools, you're getting hopefully new authorities, and you're being freed up to be really much more of a business advisor in helping companies through this process. So I'd say lean into it. It's understanding that saying that it's going to be a bumpy ride, like those little bumps that Rebecca was talking about, whether that you consolidate them into one mountain or it's just having rumble strips as you're going along the road. Hopefully it's going to be more like rumble strips, but the goal would be that everyone makes it through safely to the other end of the end of that journey, and we end up getting what we need.
Is that your last question, Mike?
I'm same question for Rebecca.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Workforce.
I think there's a lot of challenges with the workforce. I think we have to really think about the culture that we're sharing. So working with a lot of different agencies in the past, whether it was DHS, NASA, DOD, GSA, there's all sorts of little nuances with the culture. And so as we see some of this consolidation take place, I think there's an opportunity to really embrace the innovation and pull behind some of the folks that are still around that may have been a little shy, right? And so like Emily was saying, I think if we're really empowering people, we could be doing a lot. And I think it's really making sure that we're encouraging and we're making sure that culture goes along with the direction and we get there.
Okay.
So I'm going to pass it back to Gisa to wrap us up here.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. We do have a couple of, let's see, I see one question in the chat. Along with the revisions to the regulations, what do you see will need to be done internal to the agencies to speed up the process? Either one of you want to take that?
I mean, the biggest challenge is going to be how are requirements communicated, what's the process between the agencies, and if GSA is going to be doing centralized buying, how are we training the workforce along the way, not just the 1102s, but everyone in that workforce, how And how are you making sure that information flows back and forth, connects to ERPs, connects to other systems? How do we make sure that this isn't just this can't just be throw things over at GSA and see what they catch, because that feels a lot like bombardment, and none of us enjoyed that in gym class, I don't think. So hopefully this will be, much more cooperative in trying to get the right. It looks like Scott might have enjoyed it in gym class. I take that back. I did not. It was not my skill set. So trying to make sure that it truly is a collaborative process where we've thought through how data is going back and forth and how GSA is going to get that feedback on what's working and not working, and how agencies are going to get the feedback, and how you keep it is a developing, evolving process rather than assuming that the first try is going to get everything right. So those are the things I would keep in mind in looking at it. Speed up.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah,
Anything to
I
add,
think
Rebecca?
there's gonna have to be a lot of trust in the government so that people can do what they want to do with that innovation. Anytime there's empowerment, you can't come right behind with oversight and say, oh, you didn't follow this checklist, right? We've got to have some flexibility and we've got to have some trust. I think we also have to be mindful of the protests out there. We can't kill all the new ways with protesting everything to the last minute. So I think those are some of the challenges that the FAR rewrite can't address, that interpersonal coordination and then the protesting side of things.
So we have just a few minutes left. I don't see any other questions. I feel like we asked you, questions all around the changes that we're foreseeing coming up or are happening now and we see coming up. But are there any other questions that you typically receive from companies around the changes that are taking place, and how do you address them? Are there any other questions outside of what we asked today that you're getting from companies that just want to know what's happening and how you address those?
Yeah, we get a lot of questions about FedRAMP. That's something that Emily and I worked on very closely when we were at GSA, and it's been codified by Congress since then. But there's the 20X coming out. They're trying to figure out how to make it a faster, more painless experience, if that's possible. And I would just be mindful when you see the FAR rewrite, especially that Part 39 that just came out, because it's not specifically addressed, it's still there. And so I think we have to be careful that while the FAR rewrite's giving flexibility to 1102s, it does not give a free pass to industry. And so really think about security still. It's important. It is part of that OneGov strategy. When you read that initial thing, it's not just getting direct to OEMs, but it's having more secure solutions. And so really think about what the standards are out there for NIST. Think about how the CIO is getting pulled into these conversations, and make sure that you are developing your solutions in a way that's going to provide a safe solution and secure solution. So I would just kind of add that in, is that you need to really focus on security nowadays.
Thank you. Rebecca and Emily?
I say the other question we seem to get a lot is, when should an agency go, or when should a company go and be contacting GSA or contacting their customer about things? And it's when you've got something to offer them, when you've got something you want to tell them. It's everyone's with a lot of change, there's a desire to have more contact, and I think that makes sense, and it's a very human desire to do that. And and to a certain extent, it's a good thing, especially at the contracting officer level, at the program level. But be careful, as you're structuring how much you want. Make sure that if you're going to go in and meet with the leadership, that you've got something you're ready to offer them, that you've got something that you're willing to tell them that you're going to do, or that you could do. It shouldn't just. I don't think that there's a lot of meet and greet kind of atmosphere going on at this point in time, and so being very, because frankly, everyone's really busy. The late appropriation cycle this year has made everyone in the acquisition community really busy, and so trying to be respectful.
I'll tap onto that just for a second to say that even though everyone's busy, don't forget the human aspect. Don't just jump in with your questions. Hey, how are you? How's the family? Any plans for the vacation kind of thing? That helps to smooth everybody over. And even if it's just a Oh man, I've had a beast of a week. It's something, like we're all people too. Contracting officers aren't all monsters.
Being
See,
respectful and human, yes, to the people you're working with. We used to
Scott and
refer to
Mike
it as the
don't
no
look like
filter.
monsters. Um, Emily and Rebecca, a million thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we can invite you back and you can join us again. We would love to have you back again. If you're around this summer, July 16th is our next session. So please join us for that with Stan Soloway. And then we have a busy summer plans. We have lots of speakers in our queue. So take a look at our schedule. Nancy posted some of those upcoming ones in the chat feature there, and check out our COI site. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully in July. Thank you again, Emily and Rebecca, and a round of applause from a virtual applause since we can't hear everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.